The rain was beating down lightly on the school roof when Clara ran through the back gate. Her wet uniform clung to her thin legs, and her frizzy hair, loose and soaked, dripped onto the old notebook she clutched to her chest. She tried to walk slowly down the side hallway, so as not to attract attention, but her torn sneakers made a noise with each step. Clunk, clunk, as if the floor itself wanted to give her away. The door to room 3B was almost closing. Inside, all the students were already seated, and teacher Sandra was writing on the board with her stiff, impatient gestures. Clara hesitated. She knew she was late. She knew that this was the teacher who tolerated any deviation the least. But she also knew that she couldn't just skip class. Not that day. When she pushed open the door, a long creak filled the room. 23 heads turned at once. Muffled laughter, whispers, and judgmental looks. A boy from the back said, loud enough to be heard, "Look there. The beggar is here." Clara swallowed hard and stood still at the door. The teacher turned around with a disdainful expression and crossed her arms. "What now, Mrs. Clara? Do you think you can arrive whenever you want?" The girl tried to explain, but her voice wouldn't come out. Her chest heaved, and the cold of her wet uniform stuck to her like punishment. "You're late again. Get your things and leave my classroom," said the teacher, pointing to the hallway without even waiting for an answer. Clara blinked twice, not knowing if that was real. The laughter increased. The teacher turned her back as if she no longer existed. And that was how, in front of a full classroom, without anyone raising a voice, the poor girl was expelled for being late. What no one knew was what she had left behind on that path, and what would come next would change everything in that school. As Clara disappeared down the hallway, the sound of the door slamming seemed to echo louder than it should have. For a second, the muffled sound of laughter ceased. The room fell silent, but not a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that screams, the kind that embarrasses. Some students looked away from the teacher. Others hid it by looking at their notebooks. Even Lucas, the boy who had made the loudest joke, stopped smiling. There was something different that morning. Something on the girl's face when she was expelled. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was a kind of wounded dignity, as if she were holding the world inside her chest so as not to fall apart right there. Teacher Sandra went back to writing on the board, as if nothing had happened. But her writing was crooked. She noticed, erased it, and started over. Twice. "Open the book to page 48, she said, without looking at anyone. No one moved. She turned around. "I'm waiting." Page 48. One or two backpacks were opened, but the weight of what had just happened was in every corner of the room. Mariana, who was sitting in the first row, looked up hesitantly. "Teacher, Clara, what's wrong with her? She was just wet. She must have come from far away. Maybe it rained more there." "It's her problem," the teacher interrupted. "Rules are rules. She arrived late. She doesn't come in." The silence returned. Only now it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was heavy, filled with a collective guilt that no one wanted to name. In the back row, Pedro thought of something but didn't say it. He remembered that, a few days before, he had seen Clara leaving a construction site with a bag of bread in her hand. The same Clara who never brought a snack, who always said she was not hungry during recess. And today, she seemed more tired than ever, only no one knew the real reason. Yet, and while the teacher pretended to continue with the lesson, the poor girl's absence was more present than she had ever been. Professor Sandra had a firm, cutting gaze, the kind that imposes itself even before the voice. Therefore, no one dared to question her directly. When I told someone to leave the room, it was like a final sentence. She had built up this authority over the years, rigid, without exceptions. But that day, no matter how hard she tried to maintain her posture, her gaze wavered. As he talked about the numbers on page 48, his eyes would involuntarily go to the door. She tried to hide it, tried to harden her expression even more. But something bothered her. A twinge, a whisper in her conscience. Maybe it was the way Clara looked at her before leaving, not with fear nor anger, but with a silent, almost resigned pain. Sandra took a deep breath, crossing out the numbers on the board with force. That irritated her. The girl's lateness was recurrent. She had already been warned twice. She thought Clara did it on purpose, as if she wanted to challenge her authority. But deep down, she knew that wasn't quite the case. She remembered the first time Clara had come into her classroom, at the beginning of the semester. The girl was using an old notebook with pages glued together with tape. and a cracked plastic case. She didn't talk much. She was one of the last to leave, and the only one who never ate anything during recess. She didn't mingle. She didn't draw attention to herself. She was just invisible. Sandra didn't like students like that. They bring pain that she herself had learned to ignore, and that's why, perhaps, it was easier to toughen up than to see it. "Teacher?" Mariana tried again. "Do you think she'll come back?" Sandra pretended not to hear. Her gaze returned to the board, but the image of Clara, with her wet uniform, her notebook on her chest, and her eyes fixed on her, wouldn't leave her mind. She shook her head to dispel the thought. "Keep copying. No one else comes in after hours, everyone knows that." But even she no longer completely believed in that rule, and something inside her was beginning to stir. The scene repeated itself in Clara's head as she walked down the school stairs with hurried but heavy steps. Each step seemed to echo the same word she had heard before being expelled. "Get out." He didn't have time to explain himself, or even to ask. "Not that I thought it would do any good." Teacher Sandra never listened to anyone. It all happened so quickly. The silence in the room, the finger pointing at the door, the back turned as if she were a nuisance, Lucas's muffled laughter, the general indifference, and then the definitive exclusion. At the school door, the guard looked at her suspiciously. "Why are you leaving? Are you feeling sick?" She shook her head. "I was just expelled, sir." "Again?" Clara didn't answer. He just walked past him, his eyes on the ground. That was more painful than the cold on his wet feet. On the street, the light rain was still falling. The gate closed behind her with a metallic click, like a full stop. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Crying was for when you still believe that things could be different. When you're just a poor girl, pain becomes routine. The rules are tougher. The words are sharper. And time is always crueler. He walked for 2 blocks aimlessly, not knowing if he would go back home or just hide for a few hours. After all, it wasn't the first time she had been treated like something out of place. But today was different. Today was important. Today she had promised to hand in a paper she had written by hand during 3 early mornings while taking care of her younger sister. A paper about dreams, about the future. A paper that might never be read. And the worst part, she hadn't just been thrown out of the classroom. She had been expelled from the opportunity to be heard. But what Clara didn't know yet is that in a few minutes, what happened there, and outside the room, would make many people regret their silence. Clara walked aimlessly, but her feet took her back, not through the main entrance but through a side hallway that cut through the back of the school to the old walls of the warehouse. There, where teachers rarely went and students only passed when they wanted to disappear for a few minutes. She needed to breathe. She needed to not be seen. The sound of her wet shoes against the polished floor still echoed in her ears, but now it was the echo of memory, the memory of humiliation, the image of the teacher pointing to the door, the sound of her classmates' muffled laughter. Every step, an unspoken word. Every breath, an effort not to collapse. The hallway was narrow, poorly lit with peeling walls and old science fair posters fading with time. Clara ran her fingers over one of them. Education transforms. She smiled ironically. It did transform the others. Those who came from families that could afford it. Those who had new backpacks, hearty lunches, and parents who picked them up on time. Not those like her. There, alone, the weight of the world seemed to fit entirely on her thin shoulders. She leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. She looked at the wet notebook where the work still resisted. The pages curled, the cover stained by the rain. 3 whole nights copying sentences from the internet with the neighbor's borrowed cell phone. 3 sleepless nights taking care of her feverish sister, keeping quiet so as not to wake her sick grandmother. All so that for 5 minutes he could deliver something that showed that she was also capable. But now, not even that. She heard footsteps in the distance. She froze. She lowered her head. "Who's there?" said a male voice. He was a janitor, or maybe one of the cleaning assistants. Clara held her breath. She didn't want to be sent away from there either, but he didn't insist. Footsteps moved away. She remained seated, hugging the notebook as if it were the last thing keeping her in the world. And maybe it was, because at that moment, she didn't want to go home with yet another defeat. She just wanted a minute to listen, a respectful look, a space to exist. What she didn't know is that at that moment, inside the room, Her absence was starting to make noise, and outside, someone was starting to notice what no one had seen before. The silence in the hallway was broken by muffled voices coming from one of the rooms next to the back room. Clara shrank even more, hiding behind a metal cabinet used to store old chairs. The voices weren't those of students. They were adults, and they seemed to be talking in a hurry, almost whispering as if they didn't want to be heard, or as if they were saying something that shouldn't be said. She arrived like that, all wet. "And you sent her away?" asked a deeper voice, slightly indignant. "Late, as always. I had already warned you, Sandra won't let it go. But did you see the state of the young lady? This isn't normal." Clara felt her chest tighten. They were talking about her. She recognized the voice of Inspector Beatrice, one of the few school employees who, from time to time, offered her a smile. "Sandra is going too far," Beatrice said. "That poor girl. Clara, right? She's been pushed to the sidelines for months now. No one notices, but I see it. And what does the principal say about this? Nothing. She pretends not to know. As always. Today was different. It seems like someone is recording it." "Recording it?" Clara's eyes widened. Had someone filmed the scene? The public embarrassment, the teacher dismissively ordering her to leave, the silent looks. A small flame of hope lit deep in her stomach. The voices faded as the two employees walked away. Clara remained still, processing what she had heard. There was an undercurrent running behind the appearances, something she didn't fully understand, but that, perhaps, could work in her favor. It was then that she felt her cell phone vibrate in her sweatshirt pocket. A message from her neighbor Marisa, who sometimes lent her Wi-Fi. "Clara, I saw you at school. Is everything okay?" That video is already circulating in the neighborhood group. Clara almost dropped her cell phone. Video, group, neighborhood. What had been pain minutes ago was now beginning to spread. As truth, as justice. She looked at the notebook on her lap. Wet, stained, surviving. Maybe all was not lost yet. Clara held the notebook against her chest as if protecting something sacred. The cover was made of thin cardboard already torn at the edges. Some of the pages were stuck together, deformed by the rainwater. The letters, written in pencil, carefully, letter by letter, were beginning to fade. But there, in that tangle of simple words, was more than just homework. There were pieces of her story. It was an essay with the theme, "What do you dream for your future?" She had written about her desire to be a teacher, not for revenge, not to boss anyone around, but because she wanted to teach with kindness. She wanted to be the opposite of what she had often been given. In the text, she spoke of her younger sister, how much she loved learning, how much Clara dreamed of a school that welcomed, not just punished. But now, the notebook seemed worthless. The paper was damp, the ink was running, and the weight of the world once again fell on her shoulders. It was then that she heard footsteps approaching. Lighter, hurried. Clara instinctively shrank back. "Clara?" It was Mariana, panting. "What are you doing here?" Clara tried to hide her face. Mariana saw her huddled in the corner, hugging her notebook like a shield. "I saw the video," Mariana said. "Lucas recorded it by accident. He was making fun, as always, but he caught everything." Clara lowered her head. "Now everyone will laugh even more." "No, Clara. Everyone is angry. Even the inspector went to get satisfaction from Sandra. They say the principal saw the video, too." Clara didn't know what to say. She was still caught between pain and doubt. That's when Mariana reached for the notebook. "Can I see it?" Clara hesitated, but handed it over. Mariana leafed through the pages carefully. She stopped at the central text. She read the first few paragraphs in silence, and suddenly her eyes began to fill with tears. "Did you really write that?" "Yes. This is beautiful." "It's just a paper," Clara murmured. "It's not. It's the best thing I've ever read in here." At that moment, the torn notebook no longer seemed so fragile, because the words inside had finally found someone to listen to them. Mariana held the notebook as if it were a jewel. The wet pages gained weight in her hands, as if they carried more than words. They carried the truth of someone no one wanted to listen to. "Come with me, Clara," she said, standing up. "Professor Livia is in the back room grading tests. She always listens to us. I'll take you there." Clara hesitated. Her body felt heavy, her soul tired, as if that small moment of empathy was too dangerous to be real. She was used to closed doors, to broken promises, to people who pretend to care only until the first discomfort. But there was something in Mariana's gaze that seemed sincere, and Clara, exhausted, decided to take a chance. The two walked down the hall in silence. They reached the back room, a small space with old cabinets, a window covered with tape, and two tables filled with piles of paper. Inside, sitting with glasses on the tip of her nose, Professor Livia was writing something down on a spreadsheet. "Teacher?" Mariana said, almost out of breath. "Sorry, it's important." Livia looked up. "What's wrong, girls?" "It's Clara. Can you just listen to what she has to show?" The teacher looked at Clara. Her face, even tired, still maintained a trace of calm authority. "Of course. Sit down, dear." Clara sat down, half in disbelief. Mariana carefully handed her the notebook. "Show her." Clara's hands were shaking. She opened it to the right page. She handed it over. Livia read in silence, line by line. As she progressed through the text, her expression changed. First, her eyebrows furrowed, then her jaw clenched, and finally, her eyes slightly welling up. When she finished, she closed the notebook gently. "Did you write all this by yourself?" Clara nodded. "In 3 nights, after taking care of my sister." Livia took a deep breath. "Clara, you have talent. But more than that, you have truth. This is more than an essay. It's a cry that the world needs to hear." Clara didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, someone was looking at her without pity, without judgment, with respect. "I'm going to take this to the principal. Now." "But," Clara tried to protest, "do you trust me?" She hesitated, and then nodded. At that moment, in that small room where no one ever paid attention, a change began to happen, and it was a change that would no longer fit within the walls of that school. While Professor Livia walked firmly toward the principal's office, Clara and Mariana remained seated in the back room. The notebook, now in the hands of someone who would take it seriously, seemed lighter. But there was a question hanging in the air which Mariana could no longer hold back. "Clara, can I ask you something?" Clara looked at her, suspicious but not aggressive. Mariana was the only person who until now had stopped to listen. "Why are you always late? Everyone comments, you know. Some make up stories, talk nonsense, but no one really knows." Clara lowered her eyes. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to close herself off again. But after everything that had happened that morning, the expulsion, the video, the text read, the unexpected help, maybe it was time to tell her. "I wake up at 4 in the morning, Mariana." Mariana frowned. "I wake up at 4 because my grandmother can no longer get out of bed by herself. She had a stroke 2 years ago. My mother, she left when I was 8. It was just me and my sister, who is 5 years old. And Grandma. I bathe Grandma, make porridge, dress my sister, drop her off at Mrs. Zulaidi's house, who is the neighbor who takes care of her while I'm here, and then I run to school." She paused. Mariana didn't say a word. But today, Mrs. Zulaid wasn't there. Her son got sick. She went to the hospital. So I had no one to leave my sister with. The only option was to take her with me. She came, kissed me at the entrance, and went home alone, because I wanted to hand in this paper. Clara's eyes filled with tears. But not even that. "Hey," Mariana said, her voice soft. "Don't talk like that. You did more than anyone in here could do. I wouldn't have that strength. No one would. Only you." Clara smiled for the first time. A small, shy smile, but genuine. Being poor, Marie, isn't just about not having money. It's waking up every day with the world trying to convince you that you're less, that you deserve less. And yet, you keep walking. Mariana squeezed her hand. At that moment, the delay that morning took on a new meaning. It was no longer a mistake. It was an act of survival. And the story of the poor girl who is always late was finally being told with the truth that she always deserved. While Clara and Mariana were still talking in the back room, an unusual movement began to form at the entrance to the school. The doorman, Mr. Alvaro, was moving away from the gate with his cell phone in his hand, his eyes wide. On the cell phone, the video of Clara being expelled, recorded by Lucas, had already been shared more than 60 times in the neighborhood group. In less than an hour, the image of the poor, soaked girl, being humiliated in front of a silent classroom, had already left the walls of that school. But what caught the doorman's attention was not just the video. It was a name, written in the message that accompanied the video. "Someone needs to talk to the girl in the video. She is Dona Marta's granddaughter." Yes, Dona Marta from the community radio station. So Alvaro's eyes widened even more. "It can't be. Marta? That Marta? He ran to the school secretary, almost tripping over his own feet. I need to talk to the principal. Now. The principal is in a meeting, Alvaro, the girl said, looking over her glasses. Then interrupt. It's urgent. In the principal's office, teacher Livia had already handed over the notebook. The principal, Mrs. Regina, a practical and feared woman, read in silence. As she turned the pages, her face changed. Was this written by Clara? Yes, ma'am, Livia said. And she was expelled early this morning because she was late. The principal took a deep breath uncomfortably. Sandra said she already warned you about these latenesses. Rules need to be followed. With all due respect, principal, this isn't a question of rules. It's about humanity. The girl is taking care of her grandmother and sister before coming here. She's doing her best to study. And besides, this is one of the best essays I've read this year. Regina closed the notebook. Let's resolve this internally. That's when the door opened unceremoniously. Mr. Alvaro came in sweating, holding his cell phone like someone carrying a bomb. Principal, I'm sorry, but you need to see this now. She arched an eyebrow. Alvaro, It's Clara, the girl from the video. She is Marta's granddaughter. That Marta, the one who helped found this school, the one who campaigned to save the library, the woman who saved half of this neighborhood during the 2009 flood. Clara is her granddaughter. Silence fell like thunder. The principal picked up her cell phone and watched the video. The silence in the room, the teacher's cold command, Clara's gaze, and in the background, muffled laughter. She pressed her lips together. Bring that girl here. Now. At the school door, the gate opened. And, for the first time, Clara's name was remembered not for her poverty, but for the strength of her origins. While the school was buzzing with news of the video, Clara's text and the announcement scheduled for the end of the afternoon, the mood in the teacher's lounge was different. Teacher Sandra remained seated at her desk, her gaze fixed on nothing, as if she were searching in vain for an excuse for everything she had done. The words she had said that morning echoed like punches to her own conscience. She was late again. Get your things and leave my classroom. It's her problem. But now all of this had taken shape and image. It was on video. It was in the parents' groups. It was in the principal's mouth. She tried to rationalize. She told herself that she had followed the rules, that she had warned her beforehand, that she was just another unruly student. But deep down, she knew. It wasn't just about rules. She had judged and excluded. That was when teacher Livia entered the classroom. Sandra looked up slowly. Did you see the video? Asked Livia. Sandra nodded slightly. I've seen it. I've heard it. And I've already been called by the principal. There's going to be an investigation. Livia was silent for a few seconds before sitting down in front of her. Can I ask you something, Sandra? Tell me. Why do you act like this with students like Clara? Sandra hesitated. The silence that followed seemed like a confession. Because she reminds me of myself, she finally said. I was her, the girl who arrived late, the one no one wanted to sit next to, the one who wore her uniform with a pin. Then why? Because it hurts to remember. Sandra's eyes, for the first time in a long time, shone with something that wasn't arrogance. I fought hard to get out of this place, she continued. I swore I would never again be treated as the poor girl. And along the way, I ended up treating others the way they treated me. Livia sighed. Maybe there's still time to change that. Sandra looked out the window. Outside, the students were gathering in the courtyard, curious about the commotion. At the center of it all, Clara, the girl she had expelled, was now the most talked about name in the school. I want to talk to her, Sandra said softly. You'll have the chance. But first you'll have to listen. And so, the story of the invisible girl began to transform those who needed to see it the most. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the school auditorium, painting the floor with silent golden reflections. The chairs were lined up in a hurry. Some teachers were still whispering in the corners. The students huddled on the sides, anxious, murmuring different versions of what they had seen, heard, or shared. But everyone knew one thing. The poor girl was going to talk. On the improvised stage, Clara was waiting standing, with the dry and worn notebook in her hands. Principal Regina was at her side, firm as a guardian. Professor Livia smiled slightly from a distance. Mariana signaled with her fingers, encouraging. And that was when the door at the back opened, and the silence fell like a heavy curtain. It was Professor Sandra. Her stiff heels echoed on the floor. But she was different. There was no haughtiness in her gaze, No hurry, no power. She walked as if she were walking through a mirror, face to face with her own image from the past. Clara saw her approaching. Her heart raced. Sandra walked up to the stage slowly. She stopped in front of the girl who, hours before, she had ignored like someone closing a door without looking back. She took a deep breath and spoke. "Clara, I made a mistake with you. Today, and maybe on other days too. And it wasn't a small mistake. It was a mistake that exposed you to everyone, that hurt you, that reinforced everything the world already forces you to feel, that you are not enough. The entire school held its breath. But you are more than enough. You are strong. And more than anything, you are someone who reminded me of who I was, and who I should never have left behind." Clara kept her eyes steady. Hearing that was difficult, but also liberating. Sandra then extended her hand. "Will you forgive me?" Clara hesitated, not because she doubted it, but because she knew that in that gesture, she was not just forgiving one person, she was healing something bigger. She shook the teacher's hand. An emotional murmur went through the audience. And then Clara walked to the center of the stage, opened her notebook, and began to read. Her voice trembled at the first words, but soon gained strength. She read about her dreams, about her sister, about her grandmother, about the school she wished existed. And at the end she said, "I am poor, but I am not less. I am invisible only to those who choose not to look." The applause that followed was not out of pity. It was out of respect. It was for the courage of those who, even without dry shoes, walked there and changed everything. And the poor girl, finally, was seen. The next morning, the school looked different. Not because the walls had changed, nor the uniforms, nor the teachers, but because something invisible, and at the same time very real, had changed within those walls. It was as if the silence of injustice had been broken. Clara walked down the hallway with her head held high. There were no more hurried steps to escape the stairs. There was no notebook hidden against her chest. And for the first time, the stairs were accompanied by respect. Some classmates lowered their heads when they saw her pass. Others tried to smile, still embarrassed. Mariana walked beside her as if she knew that from then on no one would leave her alone. When she entered the classroom, a new silence formed, but it was different from the one of humiliation. It was not one of judgment, but of reverence. Clara sat down and no one laughed. No one whispered. Even Lucas, who usually made jokes about everything, lowered his eyes and remained quiet. When teacher Sandra entered, the class straightened up. She wore a sober but not closed expression. She walked to the front of the room, put her books on the table, and took a deep breath. "Good morning," she said, looking into the eyes of the students. "Good morning," they replied, almost in unison. She looked at Clara for a brief second, and the girl nodded slightly. It was all said there without a single word. Sandra then turned to the board and wrote in slow, careful handwriting. Essay topic: "How do you want to be remembered when you're no longer here?" He turned back to the class. "You have until the end of class to hand it in. But before you write, think about it honestly. Think like Clara thought yesterday." Clara's pencil was already in her hand. She didn't have to think much. She already knew what she would write. Because now, she had something she never had, a voice. And in the school where she had previously been invisible, the poor girl became a reference. Days passed. The video of the farm went viral. But it was the video of Clara reading her essay that really touched hearts outside the school. Parents, teachers, and even people from other cities began to comment. What was once just another case of school discipline became a national symbol of how imposed silence can be broken with words written with truth. The 21 de Abril school, previously known for its strictness, was now seen as an example of transformation. And it all started with her, the girl no one noticed, the student everyone thought was always late, the one who carried old notebooks and arrived with the hem of her skirt wet. Clara became a model of resilience. She was invited to speak on a local radio station, the same one where her grandmother Dona Marta had volunteered for so many years. She moved everyone when she said, "I didn't want fame. I just wanted to be heard. I wanted to hand in a paper. I wanted to study. I wanted to be treated like someone who mattered." And that day, for the first time, the entire school listened to her, and they never forgot her. Teacher Sandra changed her tone. She began to look at the students with more empathy. She publicly apologized in class and proposed a new subject: life stories. Clara was invited to read a passage from her notebook in each class. Principal Regina implemented a new policy. No student would be punished before being heard, and a reception room was created with the name Espacio Donna Marta, in honor of Clara's grandmother, a woman who helped build that community, and whose granddaughter changed the way everyone saw the word poor. Clara continued to arrive early, but not for fear of being expelled. She arrived because now she belonged there. She still shared the same bread with her sister. She still took care of her grandmother. She still wrote with a worn pencil. But now, she was read. She was seen. She was remembered. And on that wall in the courtyard where inspirational phrases from the students were written, a new quote was pasted with colored tape, signed by her. Being poor is not what defines me, but it taught me to fight with dignity, even when no one is watching. Clara da Silva. The story of the poor girl did not end at the gate. She became a class. She became a lesson. She became a change. And where before there was silence, now there was an echo.